Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
We're back with Sam Bair. We're going to talk about some exciting things that happened before he left university and then what happened with his career running and a coach afterwards. Sam, first thing I wanted to ask you about was your activity representing the country in the Pan American Games. What was involved in getting selected on the team?
After the track season ended, there was Pan Am trials that were held in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And basically, it was just all of the runners who had been at the national championships, national AAU champion, NCAAs, who went up there. And we had a race on a cinder track in order to make the team. Ryan did not run, but the rest of us did, including Tom Von Ruden, Jim Gorella, the guys from Oregon. It turned out to be one of those typically slow races where everyone just jogged through it, and then there was a mad sprint at the end, and I ended up finishing second to Tom Von Ruden.
It looked like the top four had less than just tenths of a second between them.
Somewhere in my archives, I think I might have a photograph of that, and it looks basically like a sprint. We're all lined up next to one another and leaning at the tape, and that's pretty much how I got selected.
How was your experience at the games? You had good success there. It was in Canada.
Yeah, we were housed in what I believe was an old military barracks situation in a large room with a number of bunk beds. We may have run some heats before the final. When the final started, I remember Tom Von Ruden and I got together and discussed how we were going to run the race. And he said, if you lead through the first 460, I'll take over from there and we'll make a race of it after that. And the only runner that we were really afraid of that was highly competitive was Dave Bailey from Canada. He was the only other runner in the race that we were concerned about. I led first 400, Tom took over. We ran together throughout the race, and then we just made a move at the end and finished 1-2. It was actually a fairly easy race, both of us. Dave Bailey, he was a nice guy from Canada. We both knew him fairly well, but Dave and I used to get in discussions about how a race would be run. We were competitive enemies for a while because he did not like to race against me because he knew I was a fast finisher. And every time we ran in a race, he would tell me that it was unmanly to hang back in a race and then sprint at the end. Over a period of a few years, we finally became friends, and he just forgot the whole thing. But he did not like me personally for a while because he didn't like the way I raced, because I would always stay close to him and then I'd kick him at the end of a race.
I had a competitor like that. I'm not sure I liked them either. But did you have any relationships like that you couldn't break through and be friendly with, people that stayed aloof, or you never cracked or had the opportunity to get back on a personal relationship with?
No, that was it. That was pretty much with Dave. Most of the guys that I knew back then were fairly friendly. Once we all got up to the Olympic trials, it put us all together in a situation where most of us would hang out together. I can remember situations where we were up on top of this mountain and there was a bar about halfway down the other side of the mountain. Well, we used to go there. None of us were really drinkers. We drank a lot of soda pop, and there was a pool table there. So most of us would just gather around the pool table and hang out together. And then we would hang out together at mealtime. Because again, we were at the top of the mountain. We used to have to drive down or take a van down to the bottom of the mountain into the village itself. And there was an old ski lift there. And we would all eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner in this facility. and then we would be bused or take cars back up to the top of the mountain. It was a very Spartan existence at those trials, but we all became friends as a result of those experiences. I never really had adverse relationships with my competitors. Usually you'd warm up together sometimes, and then after the race would end, you'd cool down together. But really, I think Bailey was actually the only runner that I had an issue with over a given period of time.
That's great. I know some of the guys who were running out when Boulder was really getting established, maybe 10 years after that, they talked about how the runners there with no money always played darts. So for you guys, it was more a pool table.
Yes, it was. Yeah, that was the only thing that was available at the time was this old pool table in this old bar. Because we were so far from civilization on top of that mountain, I actually had a part-time job paid by the Olympic Committee where we had a couple of small rental cars, and I was driving a small Toyota. If athletes needed a ride down into Lake Tahoe and they wanted to spend a couple hours down there, I would drive them down, drop them off. Because there were no cell phones, I would just say, okay, guys, look, meet me over at the drugstore across the street from the casino at 9 o'clock. And I'll drive back down and I'll pick you fellas up and bring you back up to the top of the hill where the track was located and where our trailers were located. And I would do that. So I was an Uber driver for a lot of the athletes, and they were paying me, I don't know, $2 an hour for 4 or 5 hours a day. And that was my part-time job when we were up there.
What was the state of women's athletics all the way up through the time we've been discussing now?
It was almost non-existent, really. It was rare that I even saw women racing. I can recall that the mile was basically the longest distance they were running. There were no women's track teams at that time that I remember. There were some women who were running, but it was in the very early stages of that development. Women's running almost did not exist at that time. There were some decent runners around. I remember Marie Mulder was running, and there were a few other girls, but it was just so early for women's running. Things didn't really get started when I was involved for several years after.
One more historical thing. Kent State, for people who weren't following you in track, that can often bring up to people the tragic events of 1970. You were gone from there, but the Kent State event that happened because of the Vietnam War protests and the federal police intervention. What was going on in your mind when you heard about that?
I had graduated 6 months before the shootings. I had finished up in January. I'd done my fall student teaching that fall, finished up in January. Then I went out and spent some time with the Pacific Coast Club in Southern California. I was living with John Mason at the time. John Lawson lived about 2 blocks away. He and his wife, Pat, were there. I kept in touch with a number of people when I was at Kent State to find out what was going on there. When I arrived there as a freshman, the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, was a very small organization on campus. When I arrived there, the normal dress for the average college student was a pair of blue jeans and a white t-shirt, something like that. We all looked the same. By the time I graduated, things had changed so much. You had mustaches. You had long hair. There were hippies. There were protests. The SDS had grown in size from the time I arrived till the time I graduated, that the college campus atmosphere had completely changed. And there were protests everywhere. And I got out of there, I guess, in a way, just in time. In fact, the dormitory that I lived in, Johnson Hall, that was directly across from the parking lot, I could look down out of my dormitory window onto the area where the protesters were located. next to the ROTC barracks that were there that
Right.
set on fire. When I first got to campus, we actually finished our cross country races. They were run on campus right on that facility, the ROTC facility. I could have literally looked out of my dormitory window and saw what was going on the day of those protests and the day of those shootings. In fact, one of my teammates gave me a call and told me about it. And his name was Mike Pelagi, told me what a mess the protests were and how terrible of a thing that happened. My father was a World War II veteran. He was also in the National Guards at the time. When the shootings happened, he called me, and he was a patriot. He called me and he said, those kids should have never been shot. Those people were wrong. There is no way those guys should have died up there on that hill. What happened was, he said, I believe a lot of those guardsmen were exhausted. They had been out there with those protesting students for too long, and they were exhausted, and they made a mistake. That my own father, who was wounded at Guadalcanal, wounded at Peleliu in a firefight where a Japanese man had come down off a rocky cliff with a samurai sword and tried to kill my dad. My dad was able to dispose of this man. He was wounded as well. But here was a patriot, a guy who loved his country, telling me that the National Guard had made a huge mistake in what happened at Kent State. So I tried to stay informed about what had happened at the time. Plus, my dad would give me some phone calls every now and again, let me know what was going on in the news.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing story. Amazing to be connected to it. I'm sure that stayed with you for quite a while.
It did.
Let's go ahead and talk about your move from the West Coast back to Pennsylvania. How'd that happen? And let's talk about your career there.
When I was in Los Angeles, I had mentioned the other day, I was working 8 hours a day, along with John Mason and John Lawson, two sub 4-minute milers. Lawson was an NCAA cross country champ. I lived with John Mason on the West Coast in an apartment building. Lawson, like I said, was a block away, and we trained together in the evenings. But we would start work at 8 o'clock in the morning and get done at 5. In the wintertime, it's dark at 5. We tried to train. We trained at, I believe it was LA City College, which was about 5 miles away. They had a cinder track there. And sometimes we would make our way over to UCLA and train over there. It took about almost an hour to get over to UCLA with all the LA traffic. Through the winter, when I was there, it would be dark and we couldn't even get on the track. We'd have to climb a fence to get on the UCLA track and go down there and train. After 6 months, I just thought, this is crazy. I wasn't running well. Those two guys were actually running well, considering the fact that we were working 8 hours a day. I just decided to leave and head back to Pennsylvania. I had my car out there at the time that I had bought in LA, and I drove back. It took me 4 days to drive back home to the Pittsburgh area. And then I started working a couple of small part-time jobs. I got a job teaching elementary school for a year, which I did not like. And I stopped teaching, ended up working in a bolt factory, working a shift in a bolt factory from 3 to 11. I was trying to train at the same time, which was almost impossible, but I was able to pull it off, still get in 80, 90 miles a week of training. But again, it was very difficult trying to be a full-time runner and make a living. Because as most people know, that the whole amateur standing thing was still there and no one was making any money in the sport at that time. So it was tough.
How did you get connected then to Allegheny?
I had mentioned my friend Neil Cohen had always told me that if he ever got into a situation when he would hire me as coach, he would. Neil started teaching at Allegheny Community College whenever they opened their doors, I think right around 1968. And Neil was their athletic director. They started a basketball team. They actually had a football team when I was hired there that played a few years. They had a soccer team. And Neil started a cross-country team. He called it a track team, but it was really a track team that had nothing but distance runners. He was coaching, and he was the athletic director. He called me about a year prior to my getting hired at CCAC and said, we are going to start a physical education program here. The gym has been built. The weight room is in. We've got a swimming pool here. We've got nice facilities. And myself and Bill Shea, our basketball coach, the administrators gave Bill the opportunity to hire someone to work in the physical education department and coach basketball. They said, Neil, we'll allow you to bring someone in, help you with the track team, and teach physical education classes. That's how I got hired. There was an interview process, which I went through. A few other people were hired in the department, but Neil got out of the coaching business because his duties were pretty stringent as the athletic director at the college. So I came in and started teaching full time, and Neil was our athletic director. When I got there, he had done very well with his team, his cross country team, but they had gone to the national championships times and basically folded. They just blew up and they weren't running well at all. And there were some talented kids that he had brought in. Two that I can recall when I got there was Paul Stemmer from Penn State was there. He was an All-American at Penn State in, I believe, the 6 mile or 10,000. He was also All-American cross country. 1 year, Paul finished 4th in the NCAA cross country meet when it was held at Penn State. Because I was there, I watched him race. And Rex Rote was a very good 800-meter runner who also ran for Harry Groves up at Penn State. Those two guys were there when I arrived. When I stepped on campus, both of those guys literally came to me and said, we are really glad to see you, because Neil was very intense as a coach, and they were looking for someone that could identify with them and help to coach them. And they trusted me, and I got involved with the other guys who were there. My first year when I arrived, I was able to put those guys together, and we tied for the national championship with, I think it was Southwest Michigan. It was a tie. They didn't have that rule where you went back to the 6-man or whatever.
Yeah.
So the first year that I got there, we ended up tying in the national cross country championships. And from then on, for the next 4.5, 5 years, I was teaching and coaching.
Let me just go talk about Mr. Neil Cohen just for a second. Was he ever a runner? What was his background?
Neil went to Peabody High School in the city of Pittsburgh, which is now Obama Academy. He was a member of their track team, but he wasn't very good. But then he went to Kent State, and he liked the sport. So he ended up helping the Kent State track team as a manager and helping the athletes while he was taking classes. When I went out to Penn State on a recruiting trip, he introduced himself to me and my parents, and he took us in my parents' car, took us all around the campus, around the roads in the area, and he literally gave us a tour of Kent State University, and my parents loved him. They really thought he was the greatest. Neil had a gift with words. I liked the campus. Doug Raymond seemed like a decent coach. They loved Neil. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm just going to go to Kent and I'll see what happens. When I got there as a freshman, Neil finished his degree. I believe when he was living in Kent, his final year, Bill Musselman, the late basketball coach, and Neil were roomed together off campus at Kent. And every once in a while, I would run into Neil after a workout or on the street or something, and we would talk. Then Neil went and got his master's degree at Western Michigan University under Coach George Dales. He worked with George Dales and the runners at Western Michigan. Since we were in the MAC conference, when I would travel with Kent and we would run into Western Michigan, the team, and we saw them all the time, Neil would be there. Neil would always come up and talk to me. Hey, how are things going? And then when I would go to the NCAA indoor track championships, Neil Cohen had tickets in Cobo Arena at the finish line. I ran 4 years at Cobo. I ran there as a freshman in an exhibition mile. Neil would be seated about 6 rows up from the finish line at Cobo Arena the 4 years that I raced there. And he would always come down out of the stand, shake my hand, and he would always remind me that if he ever got into a situation, he would like to bring me as a coach. I don't know why. I guess he and I seem to get along very well. From that point on, I guess from 1964 until Neil retired, give or take around 2004, we were good friends. And obviously the time that I was at CCAC that I was hired, we were good friends.
What was the next recruiting class after your first year on the tie at Nationals? Who were the first batch of those big names that came through?
Neil had a way of recruiting. He could convince. Neil was a cross between P.T. Barnum and Colonel Tom Parker, and he was a very good recruiter. But Neil made a couple of small mistakes during the next 2 years. He was, I'd like to call it shotgunning. He was just bringing in recruits by the numbers. And we were not looking at them in a sense of, will this situation work for them and will it help us? So the next 2 years, and I can honestly say this, were forgettable years. We brought some kids in who didn't perform and that were, in a way, they were problems. However, let me skip to the final 2 years that I was there. We had a very good reputation as being a great junior college for distance runners. So I went to Neil and I said, Neil, look, why don't we recruit a lower number of kids and bring in some quality kids, and let's decide whether we want them, not whether they want to come. In the second year that we had a few decent kids, I went to the kids on the team and we said, we're going to bring in this kid and this kid. Spend the weekend with them on their recruiting visit. Come back to us and tell us what you think of these kids. Do you think these kids can make it here or not? So we began to trust our better runners to take these kids out, go to the movies, show them around the campus. We'll take them on runs, then let us know what you decide as to whether they can make it here. And that's when things started to work. Plus, here's something that no one realizes, and that is the junior colleges had no rules, no recruiting rules. We did bring in some kids. We would give them shoes. We would give them T-shirts. We would give them like a lot of swag, put it in a bag, and they would take it home and show it to their friends. If you remember, there was a lot of running gear that said Run for Fun on it, Allegheny Run for Fun, and everybody liked the shirts. So we would load these kids down with a bunch of T-shirts, a couple of hoodies, and send them off back home. And they loved it because the four-year schools were not allowed. They had rules, but the junior colleges had no rules. So we could more or less just get these kids in based on the fact that they thought we had a lot to offer, which we did. When they came to us, we were able to take very good care of these kids because we had a fairly decent budget. And because we were not considered a track team as such, we might have, let's say, 15 kids that we had, and we were able to take very good care of these kids. There was some rumors written in pages about Neil being a multimillionaire and buying his athletes. That was never true. It was all just smoke and mirrors and hearsay. That was all rumor. Neil was just a regular athletic director with a regular income. And there were so many rumors about us, but very few of those rumors were true.
Let me ask you, like you said, you got along with all the runners. Sometimes seems coaches are not as good getting along with other coaches in situations like that. Were there any particular coaches or areas of the country that your success breeds jealousy and breeds anger and resentment sometimes?
No one liked us.
There you go.
I mean that sincerely. No one liked us. I'll mention something, then I'll go back and I'll talk some more. The year that we won the National Junior College Championships, I believe it was up in New York. We finished 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, or something like that.
21 points. Yeah.
Points. When we went to the awards ceremony after the meet, we were given the national championship trophy. But for the first time in the history of the sport, I was not named coach of the year. The second place coach was given coach of the year. Coaches voted for the second place. In your lifetime, has that ever happened? So I was not given the coach of the year. That specific year, I believe it was Ron Gunn got it for second place team in Southwest Michigan. And that kind of solidified our reputation as a bunch of bad boys. Also, we had recruited some foreigners, but let me mention that we had brought in Robin Holland from South Africa. Robin Holland, when he came to the United States, he went to Odessa Junior College first, out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. He hated it down there. The temperatures, look at the heat wave that's going on in Texas right now. They had sandstorms where he was in Odessa. It was over 100 degrees. He had a terrible time there. He got in touch with us and came and he transferred in from Pittsburgh. He actually sat out a year with us of eligibility, and then he ran with us. I got a call a year later from John McDonald at Arkansas. John McDonald had recruited one of our runners a year before named Mike Clark. That's when John McDonald was an assistant coach at Arkansas. He pulled me out of the stands at the NCAA meet when I was there as a visitor with Neil and walked up to me and said, "Sam, I will give a full scholarship to any runner that you recommend from your junior college at Arkansas." And I gave him a kid named Mike Clark, who I believed helped him win the distance medley when Mike was a senior in Cobo Arena, Mike's senior year. So McDonald picked up Mike Clark for me. So he called us and he said, "I have this kid down here, Malcolm East from Great Britain. His grades are terrible. I need to get him out of here for a year and boost him up academically. And if you could send him back after a year to me, I would appreciate it." I said, "Send him up." So Malcolm came to Pittsburgh. He helped us win our next national championship, which was out in, where was that? New Mexico, or I forget where it was. But Malcolm won the national championships a year later. But then Malcolm chose not to go back to Arkansas. He stayed in Pittsburgh, got married, and he's still working at a Fleet Feet store here. We got a call from Wayne Vandenberg at El Paso. Remember how El Paso had all of those Africans?
Yeah, they were the kind of the gateway, right?
He called us and he said, "I've got this runner here from Kenya. His name is James Rotich. James is having a terrible time with the King's English. He can't speak English." And at the time, we had brought into Pittsburgh a runner whose name was Amos Career. Amos's father had 4 wives. Amos had a stepbrother to one of the other wives, whose name I believe was John Kipkurgit, who won the Commonwealth Games 800-meter run way back in the 70s. Amos was John's half brother. Amos came to Pittsburgh and just started running for us. And we went to Amos and said, "How would you like, we've got this Rotich kid to come in and you can help him." Amos was a brilliant kid. We all loved him. And he spoke English very well. He said, we're going to bring Rodich in. You guys can room together and you can help him with his schoolwork and with his English. So that's how we got Rodich. We had Rodich for a year. He went back to El Paso, and Rodich, I think, also finished fourth in the NCAA cross country meet when he was a senior. And I don't recall what he did outdoors, but he was a really good runner. So we were starting to bring in some foreigners. We had Martin Green and his brother John from Ireland who came in, ran for us just for 1 year. Martin and John both went to the University of Maryland and had success there. In fact, I just did a search on Martin Green. His brother John, I believe, is teaching in Ireland, but Martin has a real estate company down in the Maryland area someplace, and the guy's got to be worth millions. Martin is a businessman now. So we had those foreigners as well. The year we dropped the team, when we stopped coaching, we dropped our team, the college more or less dropped our school budget. And so we didn't have the money that we needed to support the team. Had we continued for one more year of coaching, we would have had the most unbelievable junior college team in history. There were guys that were contacting us from all over, foreign kids who wanted to come here because what they saw was an idea of coming to the States, getting acclimatized to what goes on here, and then moving on to a 4-year school. A lot of these guys were very good runners in their own countries. They were looking for full scholarships. And so they thought by coming here, improving their times, then they could move on to a 4-year school. But we were completely disliked by all the other junior colleges. And obviously there was a ton of jealousy there that existed. I always thought of us as being the Oakland Raiders of the junior college scene.
That's great. And I know sports fans of all types are probably familiar with the book and the movie Undefeated De La Salle Football, which had a long undefeated winning streak at the high school football level. You guys had an unbeaten record that is one of the longest in any sports also.
We did. Yeah, we did. And we took pride in that. We tried to get local meets against 4-year schools. We got in touch with Harry Groves up at Penn State. Harry was actually going to race us, and we were headed up there. It was a weekend. The day before we left, we got a call from Harry, and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I would really like to run you guys, but my athletic director is against us competing against junior colleges. And the Naval Academy was coming down to Penn State as well to race. And he said also, and Al Cantello, the Navy coach, doesn't want to run against you guys either. He said, their people do not allow them to compete against junior colleges. There were some schools that would have run against us, I believe, but a lot of them were afraid to get beaten by a 2-year school.
Sure. You guys did go to the Penn Relays, right?
We did. Yeah, we competed at the Penn Relays a few times. To get back to the Penn State situation, I will say this. The year that we were supposed to go up to Penn State and race against those guys, they very well could have beaten us. There is no doubt in my mind, because that's when Stemmer was up there and George Malley was up there. Harry Groves had a heck of a crew, and it would have been a battle. And there's a definite possibility that Penn State would have beaten us.
Were there any close calls on that beaten streak? I know you're just going to go out, try to win, run the best race you can. Were there any close calls?
No. And if you can, you can recall the Farmington race, I think we scored 21 points in the national championship.
Yeah.
A year later, I think we may have scored 19 our final year. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, something like that.
8, 9, yeah.
Following year when East won and James Rodich came in second. Then you had Corrier, and I'm trying to think of our fourth kid. It might have been Wayne Kaufman, who became the longtime cross-country coach down at Clemson. Now, let me mention something about Clemson and Wayne Kaufman. next to the last year, we won the junior college championships up in Farmington. We had a number of runners, including Wayne Kaufman, Bill Stewart, and Timmy Fry from Handley High School out of Winchester, Virginia. Those four guys made All-American in that race. And when they left us, all of those guys went to Clemson University, along with their teammate from Winchester, Scotty Ack, who went to Clemson. We wanted to get Scotty at Allegheny, but that's when we dropped our program. So Scotty and those four other runners went to Clemson, and their senior year, they won the ACC cross-country championship with four guys from the same high school team.
Wow.
And they had a
Story.
wonderful coach out of Winchester named Gary Brown, the late Gary Brown, who did a wonderful job with those kids. And when I got them in Pittsburgh, I had the greatest time with that bunch, that Winchester bunch. They were such wonderful kids that I have some great memories of just being with those kids, training with them every day. And I had mentioned this, that I was only 8 or 10 years older than those guys. So we were more like friends and training partners than I was as a coach. And we got along very well together.
When in the peak of performance with the 1, 2, 3, 4 type finishes, did your coaching tactics or strategy have to adjust at all with that kind of 3, 4 guys right at each other at the top of their game?
No. We had a great place to train. It was North Park in Pittsburgh. We were all doing the same kind of work together. And those guys, like I said, they were high school teammates. You didn't have a process of learning personalities. Basically, they had grown up together. Robin Holland was with them the year before. Then Malcolm came in their second year with us. Those guys all got along so well. And that had to do with the recruiting process that we brought in to try and fit these kids together like a puzzle and have them to get along together. In a couple of years previous, we had different personality types. And once we were able to figure out the recruiting process to the point where we could get these guys to get along and have fun together, that's when things really began to click. The last 2 years that I was there, we had a lot of fun together. We had some great memories, and we had no stress. It was just an enjoyable process, and it was a lot of fun.
What was happening with these guys in the summers with their racing careers away from the school? Were they free to do whatever? Were they able to find opportunities to race in the U.S.?
The foreigners,
Yeah.
again, it was still early. Now you're talking about when they were with me at ACC at the community college.
Yeah.
Most of them, they stayed here in Pittsburgh. The Kenyans were here over the summer. We got them apartments.
Mm.
Took care of Amos and James. Malcolm was here, had an apartment. Robin Holland was here. They all stayed around and trained here. The Greens, I think the Greens were only here 1 year. So they went back to Ireland, and then they went to the University of Maryland. But those guys stayed here over the summer and would train, and I would train with them. It was more of a low-key training. And every once in a while, we would go to a road race just to keep them toned up for the fall season. But we kept a low profile in the summer. I was really against road racing and doing a lot of extra racing after the season ended, because the junior colleges had a national junior college marathon every year. About 4 weeks after the National Junior College Track and Field Championships, the kids would come back, and either the foreign kids would stay in Pittsburgh, the Winchester kids and the American kids would go home and train, and they would come back 2 days before we left for Dowagiac, Michigan. That's where Southwest Michigan was located, and there was a National Junior College Marathon Championship there every year, which we won every year. That we had a team. I think your top 3 or 4 runners scored like a cross-country meet, and would win that. So these kids had run a marathon in June. we only had 8, 9 more weeks and they were back for cross country practice.
Yeah. How big was that national junior college
Well, lots of
marathon race?
schools would come up. A lot of the Midwest schools, junior colleges would come and run that marathon. It was pretty big. The problem was that you were in Michigan in mid-June and the weather was brutally hot. The only fortunate thing was there was a lot of shade. We ran out in the country and there was a lot of shade. I can remember we were handing out a lot of Gatorade and a lot of water on the roads to those kids. The course was nice, but the weather was very brutal for that marathon. There was one year, I believe it was Holland and Fry. I think they came in together. They tied, and I think they ran around 2:23 on a very hot day. Later on in Holland's career, Robin ran 2:14 in the marathon, and Malcolm actually was, I think, fifth at Boston, running 2:11:30 about 3 years later. So those two guys were good.
You mentioned the voting of the second place coach as coach of the year, and you've got podiums, medals, Hall of Fames. What about your coaching recognition? What did you receive?
No, nothing.
Really?
I had offers to leave, had some nice offers. In fact, when my kids headed down to Clemson, Sam Colson was the coach down there. Sam was a javelin thrower who knew absolutely nothing about running. He offered me the distance coach's job at Clemson, and I declined, but I said, Sam, don't worry about those kids. I said, if you bring in a distance coach, they can teach him. Those kids know exactly how to train. We've done certain things the last couple of years. Certain days we do certain types of work. They'll know exactly what to do when they get there. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about. I had mentioned Doug Raymond that Kent had offered me his job when he retired. Nowadays, that sort of thing doesn't happen. Jerry Isom down at Miami-Dade Junior College wanted to know if I want to come down to Miami and coach his distance kids. Trying to think of where else. I got several calls, but I declined them. The money wasn't there. Most coaches were not making a lot of money. Coaching in cross country is a difficult job. You're working 12 months out of the year. You've got cross country, indoor and outdoor track, and you've got numbers in those days. 25 guys on the team. It was tough when you had track, indoor and outdoor track and cross country. Those are difficult jobs, and you've got to be very dedicated to do those kinds of jobs.
Let's talk about the transition when Allegheny decided whatever happened, the money wasn't going to be there. How'd you get that news? And was it obvious that it was permanent? What was that experience like when the transition came?
Neil called me. He used to call me Pete. He said, Pete, I think we should hang it up. College has cut our budget. They're giving me trouble. We had to drive the kids from campus out to North Park in a college van every day. And then we drive them back to campus. And everything was just falling apart. College, they weren't giving us the support that we needed. And we were hustling to get things done. We did not have a track. We had no track. So we would go to Carnegie Mellon University some days and use their track. We had to get there before the track team or cross country team came out to work out. Sometimes we would go to Shaler Area High School, which was one of the closer high schools, and run at their middle school or get on their track if there were no phys ed classes. So we had all kinds of problems with logistics, just getting these kids in their training. And when our budget got cut, when they started to scrimp with the use of the college vans, we didn't have a choice. We just had to stop what we were doing. And that pretty much ended it. And the kids that we had promised that had planned to come into Pittsburgh, we got in touch with some different schools for them. And then they headed elsewhere. And that pretty much ended it. However, whenever our running teams ended, we started a running club through Nike called the Allegheny Nike Running Team. And a lot of these kids Malcolm and Robin. And then we began recruiting a lot of local college distance runners. We literally just moved into the road racing scene because it was getting so popular in those days that we had about 20 to 25 guys on the Allegheny Nike road racing team. And we had a very
Who, between Allegheny and the team, who talked to who and whose idea was it and how long did that take to get established?
Neil somehow or another had some connections with Nike. I don't know how, but Neil was on the Nike advisory board where he would fly out to Eugene and have meetings with all the big shots at Nike. Neil was, like I said, he had a tendency to rub people the wrong way, but he could also make friends. Now, mind you, this is before Air Jordan. This is before Nike became the.
Nike was a running company before Air Jordan. Yes.
Yes. We said, look, we've got this local group of athletes here. They gave us permission to start a running group. And Neil, because he was a member of the advisory board, had a connection with Nike. So we recruited a number of super runners. In fact, there was one year we won the team championship at the Boston Marathon with Malcolm Easton, Robin Holland, a guy named Rich Bogarty, Steve Pagoni, who were very good runners from other colleges in the area. And Nike outfitted us with, let's say we had 20 guys on the team. Each member got 5 free pairs of shoes a year, number of t-shirts, different kinds of soft goods, racing gear, racing uniforms. Nike would ship that to us at the community college every year. The guys would drive into campus. We'd have a meeting, talk about the races that we were going to go to. And that lasted for several years, our connection with Nike. When the Air Jordan started to kick in and Nike became the conglomerate, then that's when everything shut down for us. And our job was to promote Nike in the regional area, which is what we did.
So you weren't flying to most races, driving to most races,
regional races. Now, Malcolm and Robin, sometimes they would be invited to some marathons, so they would travel on their own, but most of the time we would drive. I had mentioned the other day the transition from me from track and field, moving into different areas. My time for fast running had pretty much ended. My eligibility ended when I turned 30. So I was a decent road runner then, but my ability was long gone. So I more or less ran the club with Neil as the leader of the club, but then I ran the club with the athletes in a similar way that I did when I was coaching. I was just the contact for all the runners, and I was also a runner on the team. So it was a very nice transition for me to move from coaching and then to coaching these athletes, albeit the majority of them were training on their own by then, and they were all graduated from college.
I just wanted to get a feel for this recruiting. You described Neil as a master recruiter, and that's certainly a part of team success. What was your role? Identifying, discussing, picking, choosing? What role did you have with Neil?
Neil had very few friends, but he trusted me. And we got along very well together. So my job was just to spend all my time with the athletes. If there were problems, to report back to him. If I saw a situation that needed addressed, and Neil would crack the whip if there was a problem with the kid or an academic problem, a running situation. My job was simply to be the best coach I could be and to keep in touch with Neil about any kind of situation that would develop. And we were together constantly or on the phone together constantly. I had a perfect situation where all I did was teach classes. I'd go out for a run with the guys in the afternoons. Most of them did a morning run. They usually do a 30-minute run in the morning. I lived near some of the guys, so I'd do a run with them, an easy 4 or 5 miler, and then we would train together in the afternoons. So my situation was absolutely perfect because I did not have to do all of the recruiting. I did not have to do any paperwork at all when it came to these kids. was just spend time with them. And if I saw an issue that might become a problem, I would report back to Neil, and then we would get together and fix that problem. And it got to the point where a lot of our better, more responsible runners would even come to us and tell us if any problem was about to develop. They were very good about that.
Did Neil get recognition, official from the sports community?
We got some nice write ups in the papers here locally about our teams. And Neil did. He did get recognized locally. We even were recognized in the mayor's office. We went in and they gave us a certificate, the whole team. I've got some photos somewhere around the area with the team that went in and was given recognition in the mayor's office in front of the council members and everything. So yes, we were, and everyone knew who we were. Everyone knew who we were. The 4-year schools knew who we were, and they would call us. We get a lot of calls from the 4-year schools looking for distance runners and middle distance runners if there was any that we thought that would fit into their programs. There was a period of time there when things were really rolling and everyone knew us and knew about our program. There were also a lot of rumors that were totally ridiculous rumors, but it helped to bolster our reputation.
Yeah, yeah. I talked to Doug Watts, the Edinburgh coach. There was a little bit of similar thing with them, and he said, we used to, for better or worse, sometimes we would encourage it. People thought we were taking drugs, and we thought, well, that'll just make them more scared of us.
Exactly. And that's how we felt.
When you reflect on it all, you've had lots of careers, from a young runner to competing at the national level, to being a coach, to being a father. What is your legacy in this sport to you?
I'd like to think that I did everything I could to have success on whatever level I was at. I got the most out of my body as a runner. I did the best I could as a coach, as a teacher. I've seen it all up to a certain point. Obviously, times have changed. Now I just watched the USATF meet, and everything has completely changed. I feel like when I was in high school, I used to read about the history of track and field, and I remember looking at articles about Jim Thorpe. And now it's 2023. If people look back in our direction back in the 60s, I am like Jim Thorpe was.
Right.
That's so far back. All of like front 4 minutes 4 times in the mile, all on cinders, without a pace setter, without carbon fiber shoes, without scientific training. But I did the best that I could with the circumstances that existed at the time and got the most out of all of those circumstances. I don't have any regrets. If I had one regret or something that angered me, it was the 5 years that I was kicked out of the sport because I accepted paltry amount of money. I am still angry about that, but not much I could do about it. But I missed 5 years where I could have had a lot of fun just racing on the roads and enjoying myself. But I gave everything I could to the sport.
Let's just talk about your family life just for a second. We've already talked about Sam Jr. and his running career. You've been married, and we talked about how you met your wife. Are you involved with kids and students now that you've retired?
I was briefly there was a small 4-year period where I worked as a volunteer coach here at the local high school. It was actually over a period of about 8 or 9 years where I coached my son. Then I was coaching a girl named Brianna Schwartz, who ended up going to the University of Colorado. Very tragic career. We found out that she had celiac disease from the time she was born till present day, but we didn't find out until she was at Colorado. I did some bone scans. She had some brittle bones and some issues, but I was coaching some high school girls that won a couple of state championships, and Brianna Schwartz, a girl from another local high school, Madeline Davison, who won a state championship. I was coaching them individually. Beyond that, the last several years, I've just been hanging around the house. I've acquired a couple of hobbies. If you can see behind me on this, there's a gun cabinet over here. You see the letters. It's got Sig Sauer, Heckler Koch, better holsters. I have this hobby. I have a bunch of handguns, striker fired handguns, and I belong to a gun range. So I've got a bunch of Walthers, Glocks, Heckler Kochs. They're all striker fire, and I have a permit to carry. So I'm going to a gun range twice a month. I'm a member, and I fire away with these striker fired handguns. Sometimes I carry a concealed weapon if I go into a bad area. And I've got that as a hobby. That's my hobby. I do. And
Is that competitive at all? Or is that just practice shooting?
it can be, but I just go and get the paper targets out and set them at different distances and fire away. It seems to work off whatever anxiety I have, and it's a lot of fun. So lately, that's pretty much all I've been doing, and I'm trying to keep my fitness going, keep my weight down, keep my health going. I'm 77 now. I'm done with the volunteering. We'll let the younger kids take over and take my place.
One last thing is from those Allegheny days, from some of those student athletes you met at their very young age, you're still in touch with any of them? Probably Malcolm, any of the other ones?
Keep in touch with Malcolm. Robin and Holland and I were together a few years back. We were shooting clay pigeons. I had picked up a shotgun. We were going up into the mountains and shooting clay pigeons up there. I keep in touch with Billy Stewart out of Winchester, Virginia. Lenny Critchko, who used to run for me. I'm on Facebook with Lenny. We keep in touch. We had a reunion, Allegheny reunion about 6 years ago. We're trying to have one more. We think maybe we may be able to get together up here in Somerset, Pennsylvania, because that would be an easy drive for the kids to come up from Winchester and the kids from out of Philadelphia to come up. I still keep in touch with those guys. Facebook is good with that. I'm not crazy about Facebook, but it's good to keep in touch with the old runners like yourself and like some of the guys from Edinburgh, like Jeff Foster, a lot of those guys, Rich Bogarty, some of the old boys from Western Pennsylvania who are on Facebook, and the old guys that I coach. Yeah, we still keep in touch.
And Len's in Michigan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, I will get a chance to interview Len too. He's agreed to do this too. I'm sure a lot of these guys will enjoy hearing your reminiscences, and we'll find out if we can actually say this. There's rumor that there might be a book written about some of the years.
If you call Steve Wells, book is finished. It's fine. It's fun. He sent it to the Kent State University Press. He had talked to a few publishers, but they felt that it was too niche. The book was, the word that he told me was too, and I just talked to him 2 days ago and told him about you. I also have a story that I could tell you. It's completely off the record.
I can stop recording.
It's completely off the record. And when I tell you this story, I am telling you the God's truth.
Well, how is that for a cliffhanger? The book that hopefully one day will get published about Sam Bair and the years at Allegheny before and after, and the story that's off the record. Sorry, that's off the record.